Hey everybody, welcome back. And this is the last of the three very basic introductions to data and process modeling. And we're going to be talking about things in a classroom at this point. So a couple of variables that might come up in a classroom might be something like, variable teacher is equal to Mrs. whoever. Maybe variable student. Let's go with a Boolean. A Boolean could be class is in session, and class would be in session and would be true, and then when the bell rings it'd be false. So let's say we're going to introduce one thing that we haven't done in the previous ones. We're going to say class ending time, and we're going to do a bunch of things with time. Time is now going to be an incremental integer value. So let's say that class ends at 7 and it starts at 6, and no, let's say that it ends at 7 and it goes from, well, I don't know, whatever, 2 to 7 or something. So class ending time is going to be equal to 7. And then we'll say variable current time is equal to, and for this one we'll say 6. And the idea for that would be that, class is in session because the current time is less than the class ending time. And the last thing might be something like variable, grades on recent test. And the grades on the recent test are going to be 91, 54, 82, 68. I'm saying 90 and 71. Sure, those will be the grades on the recent test. So our branching situation is going to be a little bit more complicated. So we're going to do a couple of things. We're also going to add in a class starting time. So variable class starting time is going to be equal to 5. And classes in session is going to be equal to true. We're going to set it equal to true, and the reason is because we have to set it to something. But eventually we're probably going to adjust it a little bit, and yeah. So what we're going to do here is kind of a little different than what we did in the previous ones. So for this one, our branching is going to be if current time is greater than class start time, and less than class end time, we're going to say that class is in session. It's okay. So first we'll start with, we don't really need to change that. So if current time is greater than class start time and less than class end time. So this is more complicated than the ones we've done before, but the same idea applies. We have an if statement. The if statement is going to check some condition, and if that condition is true, it's going to execute some code inside of there. So for this one, we're going to say that class is in session. Let's start with it's false. And the reason we're going to start with it's false is because we're going to say that class is in session. So we're going to reassign class is in session to be equal to true in the event that this statement is true. And this statement is going to describe the current time is greater than the class start time and less than the class end time. So one thing we're going to make use of here is something called the AND operator. So the AND operator is going to allow us to have two separate Boolean statements. One here, one here. The first one is going to be if the current time is greater than the class start time. So current time, we're going to say if that's greater than, and we want class starting time. So we basically, if the current time is past the class start time, then we're going to say and this is going to be and the current time is less than the class ending time. So this is the most complicated Boolean statement we've done so far, but it follows in the same format, which is that we're using the operators to compare things in a way that makes sense based on what we described out loud. What we described out loud is basically if the current time is greater than the class start time and the current time is less than the class ending time, then that means that we are in class. So if that's the case, we're going to say that class is in session. So we'll say class is in session. We're going to set it equal to false. Sorry, true. We're going to set it equal to true. So there's our if statement and our dealing with classroom issues. And, that's a pretty good one. We're going to do another if statement. We're going to say if a grade is greater than, let's say 70. No, let's say 60. Yeah, we'll say 60. Greater than 60, then the student passed. So we'll create a couple new variables real quick. We'll say variable grade is equal to 90, and we'll say variable, well, that's it. We'll say if grade is greater than 60, and here we didn't write any pseudocode for it, and the reason is because we don't really, it's not really involved, but we'll just say that student passed. Now we can do this a couple ways. We could have a variable that said did student pass and set equal to true or false, or we could just console.log student passed. Now the looping that we're going to do here is going to be more complicated than anything that we have done so far. And the reason is because we eventually need to start threading in the idea that all of this is going to get much more complicated very quickly. However, you can always kind of return back to the basics and kind of build up from scratch. So what we're going to do is we want to loop over the grades and then log passed or log failed for each one of them. So here's how we're going to do that. First, we're going to pseudocode out the ideas we just described. So we need to loop over the grades for students on a recent test. For each grade, or let's say for current grade, and honestly, we don't need to really write that. We could just say if current grade is above 60, log passed to the console. Eventually, you'll find out something called an if-else statement. An if-else statement is basically like this. It means if this is true, same idea, we'll do this. Otherwise, do this. Now, the thing about this is, though, is that the same way we could do that, we could also just put another if statement. Now, if-else usually is kind of is good for binary situations. If the lights are on, turn them off. If not, turn them on. Although that's kind of a ridiculous situation because you don't really have any goals in mind. But this situation that we're describing with the grades does make sense. If the grade is above 60, they passed. If it's below, they failed. So we could use an if-else statement, or we could just use two if statements. Since we've only really introduced formally if statements, we're going to use two if statements. And these are going to be inside of our loop. So we'll say if current grade is above 60, log passed to the console. And then if current grade is, we'll say is equal or above 60 because we're not monsters. If current grade is below 60, sorry, that's a failure. So we'll say log failure to the console. So let's go ahead and code this out. Loop over the grades for a structure. So we've gone over previously about how to loop, and the way we're going to do is we're going to start with an index variable, and we're going to create a while loop where that index variable needs to be less than the array that we're calling this on, which is this grades on recent test. So we'll grab that, and we'll say that it needs to be less than the length. Now, for those of you curious, to copy and paste like I've been doing, you hit Command-C, Command-V, or if you're on a PC, Control-C, Control-V. Although, to be honest, if you are on a PC and you don't have experience with Linux and you're needing to watch these videos, it might be the case that you'd be better suited spending some time learning Linux, getting a macOS operating system, or kind of spending a little bit more time before you attempt something like Hack Reactor. It's difficult enough as it is, and it happens to be taught using a macOS operating system. So save yourself the trouble if that's you, and maybe plan accordingly. So we've got our while statement. I'm going to wrap the edges of this pseudocode around it so that this is the body of our while statement. We're going to say if the current grade, and so previously we've talked about the way to get the current value is to say the name of the list, recent grades on recent test, at, and this one's going to be the index, which is what we're setting up the loop for. So if grades on recent test is at the index is greater than or equal to 60, then the person passed. So we're going to log passed to the console. So we'll say console.log passed. If the current grade is below 60, so this is one of those where we can copy and paste some stuff, but if you are at this point, I would highly suggest copying and pasting as few times as possible. Getting faster at typing, especially things like square brackets and things like that, can be very, very useful. And if you never take the time to practice it, you probably will not get very good at it. So just something to consider. Log failure to the console. And this is in the event that the grade for the current student is less than 60. So we'll log failure. Now we want to do a quick examination. We're going to examine this array. So I'm going to grab this array and bring it down so we can look at it all at once. We'll put it right here. So what should happen is that we're going to iterate over the grades in the array. We're going to check each value individually. If any value is below 60, it's going to log failure. So I would proffer that we're going to log passed, failure, passed, 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 passed. So let's go ahead and run it. We might have something else going on here, student passed. So it'll also say student passed. And that's it for things that are being logged to the console. So let's go ahead and run this. And here is a perfect example of what can happen if you do an infinite loop. See how it's still running and just keeps saying, I'm passing, I'm passing. So we're going to hit stop because we don't want it to break. And we're going to go down and notice that we did not do something that we always need to do inside of our while loops. Because all this is doing, and you'll notice we never logged failure, right? So if we scroll up, you can see that on the right side here it is scrolling. But as we get all the way to the top, we see that there's just passed. And what that's going to indicate to us is, well, a couple things. Grade is greater than 60, constant.log student passed. That's kind of strange. I feel like that should have run first. Maybe it just doesn't list that. Nothing to worry about though. What we do need to make sure though is move index variable to next value in list. And the way we do that is that index plus equals 1, index is equal to index plus 1, index plus plus. Any of those are going to get the job done for us. So if we clear the console and run it again, hopefully we should see what we're looking for. Student passed, and that's the if statement from up above, this one. Passed is our first grade, which is 91. The only failure is this 54, and then the rest of the students all passed. So that's pretty much it for now. One of the things that we're going to move into as we get further on is the possibly the complications that could come from this. I'm not sure. I might make this into an entire series that kind of gets pretty complicated by the end, or we might leave it at this. But for now, this is the end of the playing with data modeling and process modeling for the absolute beginners. We're going to move into eloquent JavaScript, which, disclaimer, it's just going to be my reading the chapters, because sometimes it helps to have somebody read it out for you. I'll also be messing with any code samples that they have and kind of discussing any issues that come up as we're going. But like I said, it's mostly going to be a read-along. Hope you're enjoying these videos. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.